Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Steve Sisler. Now, Steve is the founder and CEO of an organization called Behavioural Resource Group. And as you can probably gather by the title, it's all about understanding and correcting behaviour in organizations. Now, Steve is a fascinating character. He's got a very non-traditional background, but this podcast really would be of interest to CEOs and leaders of people because it really challenges what you do when you have somebody in your team, in your organization that is not quite fitting in or is causing some disruption. And the process that Steve works through, he calls it the uncover, the discover, and the recover process that he goes through, and he talks through that in the podcast. But it really is kind of challenging you how you deal with those, difficult situations, difficult people that you've hired into the organization that may be very valuable in some ways, but they're also their behavior is challenging, or they may be underperforming, and you really want to make sure that you've done everything you can to really recover that situation. But how do you sometimes come to the decision when you've done all you can and it's just time to terminate, and how do you separate? And Steve actually talks about that not every situation is solvable and not every situation is recoverable. So what do you do when you actually get to that stage, and when do you actually make that parting? But also, in terms of hiring new people into your organization, how can you predict that this person will fit? And he's got a very interesting take in terms of aligning values to the organization and to the team that the person is about to join or looking to join. So I really think you'll find this fascinating. Steve is different, and he won't mind me saying that. He does not suffer fools gladly, and subtlety is not a word that one would associate when you come to Steve. So I hope you really enjoy that. If you want to listen to more podcasts, if you want to download my free book, The 10 Key Traits of Top Business Leaders, then go to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com, and you'll be able to access it down there, and also loads of goodies that are all about helping you to become a much more effective leader. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy this very interesting and somewhat different conversation with the great Steve Sisler. Steve, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Winning Teams podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me on.
I mean, I know that you're an expert in the whole area of human behavior and people intelligence, but to my mind, just based on what I know you're just a little bit different to that. I'm just curious, what is the challenge that you love to hear from a CEO who wants to bring you? What's the challenge that you think, oh God, that's great. I love getting my teeth around that. What is the one that really gets you up?
I'd say when they're experiencing some issues with maybe turnover or maybe some specific manager, they don't know what it is. I know for a fact that I will figure out exactly what it is and will be able to get that fixed, as long as I have cooperation. So I really like doing that. I like to, I call it uncover, discover, recover. And so my favorite thing to do is to uncover and then discover what the issues are because of the way an individual thinks, the way they view the world, and what their cognitive biases are. I measure all that in my tools. So once I have those measurements, I can figure out what it is. I love doing that.
I've been on the receiving end of you of the two, and they are so. When you do what are you looking for? And then once you've identified, how do you go about, the change? Because I found it, and I reference it again. Some of the stuff that you came up about me. So it's typically the sort of stuff you go. What do you do with it? So once you know it, then what do you actually do with it?
Well, once you know what's going on, you can actually determine the odds of somebody uh, making effective change. Now, here's what most people don't understand. There are several elements involved in behavior change. The main one is the person themselves, their brain, and how they view the world, how they think, these types of things. The second element is the environment that they're in. So here's a great example. I took on a new client. We just installed the dashboard into their office so their HR people can go in and look at the profiles. And I spent a day with them showing them how to work the system and so forth. And one of the topics came up of one of the companies they're working with. They're like an outsourced HR for almost 1,000 companies. And they can't keep people. They can't keep certain people. So right away, I knew what the problem was just by the statement. So you get all these different people that come in and they're hired and they run all kinds of tools that they had previously to mine, and yet nothing seems to work. Well, the common denominator is the person managing all these people. So that's the problem. And so I said, well, let's measure them. And then we haven't yet, but when those measurements come in, I'm going to see exactly why people won't work there. So I'll find tremendously gifted, atypical, unconventional, all kinds of different people types, and they work into a company. If they're mismanaged, it will not work. I don't care how smart they are. I don't care how much of a people person they are. If they feel disrespected, if they feel like they are not being rewarded for their energy and efforts because they're spending 6 to 8 hours a day pouring into somebody else's business that somebody else owns, and they're getting enough emotional feedback from that to make it worth their while, there'll be all kinds of problems. So, when I look at the profiles, I'll know who the difficult people are, who can't get along with who and why, all these different puzzle pieces. And when I start bringing my advice to bear into that organization, to the degree that they trust me will be to the degree that they listen. To the degree that they listen will be to the degree that they'll experience real change. And that's what we do. So we typically get a retainer with a company, and we just do this all the time. And we slowly, over the course of 12 months, we work through all these issues until pretty much we got this thing running pretty smoothly.
So when you go in, okay, so you do the assessment, and I'd have to say, having seen the reports and then heard your feedback, you don't regurgitate the report. You interpret and you add, and you have such insight into the report. So it's not kind of, here's a report and you can read it and walk away, because that won't do. It's your interpretation and your understanding of it. So how do you then, once you've done that, how do you then, so either with the CEO or the members of the team, how do you get them to engage in changing? And are there things they can change? Are there things they can't change?
Right. Yeah, there are things they can't change. And I call this change or exchange. So so I had a company, this goes back about 13 years, and I never forgot it. A very, very difficult person. He was an authoritarian style. And there was so many things wrong with the way this guy interpreted the world, that I told him the odds of him working out are slim to zero. And I said, well, we don't want to fire him because we fear he's going to retaliate in some way, because they had been sued by a previous employee because he was dysfunctional in his role, and they let him go, and he claimed they let him go because he was over age 50. He sued and they had to settle out of court. So they've already had some poor experiences with this, and they were really scared. And I said, well, knowing his style, if you couldn't tell him he has to coach with me once a week, he'll quit in probably 2 to 3 weeks on his own. They said, really? I said, sure. So that's what we did. He quit in the second week.
Wow.
Why? Because his brain type does not like to be told what to do.
And is that something that you come out? So, okay, was that somebody deciding I am not going to change, so therefore I am leaving? Is that how you interpret that? Or
Well, they don't decide I'm not going to change. Their brain's thinking, change what?
right?
They don't see it.
Yeah.
It's called low clarity.
Okay.
So people, we have external and internal clarities, and I measure them, right? So if you have low clarity externally and you're looking at people, then you can't read how they're feeling. You don't know. So what do you do if you can't read what people are feeling? You have to rely on your bias, your cognitive bias, which is what you already think about people.
Mm-hmm.
Right or wrong, that's what you have to rely on. So if you have a negative brain bias towards people, which means you're distrusting of them, and that could be anywhere from a 51 to 100 on negativity. So if you're in the 80s on negativity and you have no clarity, then your brain thinks all people are bad. That's just how you wake up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So what can happen is you may be saying something to somebody and they're shocked at what you're saying and why you're saying it and how you're saying it. And you're saying, I don't know what everybody's upset about. I'm just being honest. Like, I don't know why you're upset, because you can't see that the words you're saying are going to be taken in a context that makes them feel terrible. But because you don't see that, you don't know that's happening.
So, okay, just if you take that example, and so you come in and you're saying to me, okay, John, this is what your profile says about you, that you basically don't like people or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was that you said.
Right.
So fine. So I'm in the organization, but in order to be a valuable employee or manager, whatever role I have, I
Mm-hmm.
need to change that.
Right.
Can you change? Can you? Oh, well, sorry, I've got to change myself.
Yeah.
But can you actually have an engagement with me whereby I will actually begin to change? And what are the things you need to do to get me to change?
Okay, so if that's the case, I had an individual a while back that happened. Um, I met with him, and basically, it's like you're meeting with Sisler, and if that doesn't work, we've got to figure out our options.
Right. This
Okay, so
last
there
chance
has
saloon.
to be, yeah, there has to be enough pressure that they understand if this doesn't work, nothing will. But we care about you enough to try it. Now, I'll already inform the owner that the odds of this happening are whatever, 60-40. And do you want to do it? And they'll oftentimes say, sure, let's try it. And I understand that it might not work. I said, okay. So I spent actually 4 hours with this person. And I told him just to do a few things. And he said, okay, I'll do them. And he did it. Within 4 to 5 weeks, people started referring to him around the office as the born again.
Right. Okay.
They thought he got faith because he was so different. Now, what was different? 2 things. I said, you need to change just 2 things. And then when you see the results of that, you may want some more. Open your office door because it was always closed. And when your subordinates come in because they need something, turn around and look at them and listen intently. That's all I want. Can you do that? He said, sure, I can do that. So he did. That was 12 years ago. Never heard another word from that company after that. I got a letter from his wife.
Wow.
So that guy made a difference. He changed.
Okay.
I've got several of those stories.
Okay.
And
So
then I got other stories where they
yeah,
don't change.
yeah. Okay. And is that because they don't want to, don't need to, don't see the point, or don't see why, or don't
Yeah.
see what you're talking about?
I or the individuals in the organization are not worthy of their change. That's how they think.
That's how they see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So
Yep.
if you take it from another perspective, say, okay, I'm going to hire a team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so okay, so I've got kind of skills and knowledge and expertise that I want to have in that team, but I
Mm-hmm.
also want to have a kind of a fit.
Mm-hmm.
Do I bring you in to say, okay, Steve, I want you to come in and I want you to kind of go through the interview process with me or as part of the interview process?
Yeah.
And how do you then get the right fit across the team?
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I do a lot of. And I just did a 2.5-hour webinar yesterday with an organization of 6 people. No, 8 people actually. And these people, some of them were new and came through my system before they got on that team. And so what I did with this organization is what I do with a lot of organizations. All right, let's look at the team you already have and see what we got going on here. And we run them through all our behavioral analysis. So we look at the team. Okay, here's your culture. I don't care what your plaque says. This is your culture, because this is how your people think. And here's where the similarities are. So we look at the value system, so how they value things in the world. And if you got similarities in value, you're going to create endurance in an organization. Just like a marriage. A marriage endures because the value base is similar. In the marriage is an attraction because the behavioral orientations are different. We get that whole opposites attract idea out of that. That's in behavior. It's not in value. Opposites in value don't work out. So when we get that down and we see there's enough of all these things that's creating synergy, okay, great. Now we're going to bring somebody in. Who are they working with? Who are they working for? Okay, these people. Okay, these are the types that are really going to get along with these types of people. So let's go find the skills. Let's go find all the education. Let's find these static things that you need them to know so that they can do the job. And then let's look at how they're viewing the world and other people and this kind of a thing. So that's what we did. And so they ended up with 2 or 3 end candidates, all gone through our entire system. And I just looked at it and I said, oh, that's easy. That's the person right there. That person right there is going to be the best fit. And here's why. Because they have strong empathy, which means they are able to feel what other people are feeling. And most of the people in that organization can do that. They all have high clarity on people. And they're all innovative thinkers, which means they all believe there's more than one way to skin a cat, every single one of them. And so does she that they were bringing in. She thinks the same way. And so we looked at all these different and they hired her. And then she was in the group meeting we did yesterday. And so far, so good. Now, the odds of her working out are very, very high, simply because there's going to be no points of contention on the way they think and view the world, which means how they're going to do something.
That sounds a bit like to me that we're hiring people like me.
Well, there are no people that are alike. People are like fingerprints. They have similar traits. Okay.
Right.
Now, where am I getting the similarities? Am I getting it in behavior? No. I'm getting the similarities in how they view the world, how they find meaning in the world. That is the most important piece. Okay. Your own self-esteem. Think about it. Your own self-esteem. 84.27% of people out there have low self-esteem. So you get a person into the company that has extremely high self-esteem. Everybody on the team is going to think they're an egomaniac. Mm-hmm. Okay. He's not an egomaniac. He's confident. But people with low self-worth interpret that as a bad person. That's just how it works. So I have to tell them, okay, this person has very high self-worth. They're very vested in themselves. They're going to come in. They're going to be confident. They're going to hold their shoulders high. And when you disagree with them, they're going to disagree back. Are you able to handle that? Because it's not, quote, cocky, because it's not high enough, but it's higher than everybody else. So they're going to interpret that in a way that causes them to justify their own feelings of low self-worth, because nobody in the world seeks to verify if what they're thinking is accurate. They only seek to justify how they feel. And the way they do that is they create what we call post hoc storytelling. They make up stories about other people that make them feel good about where they're at, so they don't have to change, because the brain doesn't want to change if it doesn't have to. So the companies that work with me, they get all this because I've explained it all. And so it's just clockwork now. It's just like, just call Sisler, we'll figure this out.
Okay.
And that's what we do.
And when, I mean, okay, so if you're coming in, you do your testing, you discover, you kind of uncover the issues, you know what you're dealing with. The process then to actually deal with somebody or with the collective team in terms of changing, how do you actually facilitate and just make that change happen?
Well, typically, I mean, most of the companies, people tend to get along pretty well. You've got isolated incidents where you've got a real problem. And if I'm dealing with that, I meet with that person. They've already been instructed that this is where the issues are. This is what we need to change, this kind of a thing. What we'd like you to do is work with our consultant, blah, blah, blah. And we go through that. And through that process, as a matter of fact, I had a company years ago where we had a woman in the organization that was just flat mean. And there was one girl in there that was really happy all the time. And she walked into the coffee office where they did the coffee, and this other girl was in there, and they're making coffee. And she said, "Ah, how was your weekend?" She turned around and looked at her, and I'm paraphrasing. She said, "You know what I don't like about you? You've always got the sun shining out of your ass."
Right.
That's what she said to her first thing in the morning. So this was a real problem. So when I met with this girl, put her through the system, come to find out, her first 15 years of life were living hell. And so what I did was I worked her through some of that. She broke down crying in the office. I said, "Listen, do you want to work here?" "Yes." "Well, we're going to have a group meeting, and you're going to be the center of attention because I'm going to explain a little bit about you to these people. Is that okay with you?" "Yes." So I did. We had a group meeting, and I didn't say any details about anything. I just said, "You need to trust me on this." And what I did was I asked these people to give her a second shot and to show a little bit of mercy. They did. She did. It worked.
So which came first, her decision to change or their willingness to actually accept her in a different way?
Her decision to, number one, realize she has a problem. Okay, think of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
I am powerless over my addiction. If you can't do that, you can't even get in.
Mm.
All right. So that's the beginning. I have an issue. I can't seem to fix it. Will you help me? If they're there, we'll do it. If they're not there, no one can do it. And I'll tell the company, "Nope. Do what you want with her. I can't help her." Just like that. That's what I would have said. But
Because
she was willing.
she was willing, because what you're talking about here, I mean, okay, you're talking about in a work environment, and I work in that kind of business environment as
Mm-hmm.
well. But actually, what you're talking about here is something deeply personal, and
Yes.
it's in their
That
entire life,
yeah,
and,
and
and
it
it's playing out.
overflows into the work environment. We show up at work as is.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, our engine's one way, but what do we do when we go in for an interview? We go through the car wash.
Mm.
We go through the car wash first. We wax it. We put tire shine on all the tires in the interview, but the engine still sucks. And so they get in that place, and after 6 months, they're like, "What's going on?" Well, they never check the engine. They never check the oil. That's what I do. Like, the car's pretty, but it doesn't run. Like, let's find out what's under the hood. So my whole thing is what's under the hood of these vehicles, because you're fixing to get into the Daytona 500. I had a guy we were looking at for a hire for a very high level, C-level position. And I talked him out of working there. I said, "You don't want to work here." He's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, let me tell you a little bit about the organization and how this works." I started describing it. He's like, "Yeah, you're right. I don't want to work here." I said, "Great. Okay. Awesome." That was it. And then the one they did find worked out. He would have quit. That would have been a huge waste of money.
Yeah. But I've found it really interesting when you did, as part of the conversation preparation, when you did the assessments on me, and I mean, and I'm used to reading reports,
Mhm.
so but my reading of the reports and your feedback were very were very different, right?
Yep.
So it's your
Yeah,
ability to interpret that
that's
data.
right.
You're not
That's
just
right.
kind of regurgitating the data to me,
Oh,
because
no, no. I
I can
read
read the bloody
numbers.
data, right?
Yeah, I read numbers. When
Yeah,
I'm consulting, I'm looking at numbers. I'm not looking at sentences.
yeah.
I just look at numbers. So when I see those numbers, now we have to create some general, you know, structure called statement setting that gives a general idea about how people will think and do and all that kind of a thing. You have to do that.
Mm.
But, uh, that's like saying I have a cough, and then I come along and say, "No, you have cancer."
Yeah. But I was amused and yeah, very interested in the reports. But I mean, some of the things, I'm just looking at some of the things that you said, that that you said about my profile, that,
Hmm.
likely to do better in chaos, don't like to be ordered around, don't tell me what to do, is moved by to spontaneity,
Hmm.
and a lot more besides. But when you're looking at that, I mean, if I was working in an organization, I mean, I read that and I think I could be a pain in the ass to actually if I was working in an organization with that,
Hmm.
with that those sort of tendencies.
Right.
So if I was working, my boss came in and said, "Listen, can you go and fix Murphy? Right? Can you can you work me towards not living out those sort of
Yeah.
comments?"
Okay. Here's what I have to do, though. I have to look at what are you producing for the organization? Like, are you carrying your weight? Are you creating more than they're paying you? In other words, what's your product as a person in this organization doing what they need you to do in an effort to generate some sort of a profit? Like, where are you there? That's what I find out. Oh, he's great. We love him. And yeah, he definitely is pulling his weight in that category. I said, okay, so here's what we need to do. John needs to be left alone. Can you do that? And they're going to say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, there are areas where John is excellent. Am I wrong or am I right? Well, no, you're right. I said, then why do you bother him? Because of your ego? You afraid of John? I mean, this is what it's like to consult with me.
Right.
I said, because John will do more for you than you will if you let him. And I had a company that had this happen. They were going to fire the guy because the manager didn't like him. But they said the manager told the owner, well, he's just not going to work out. So they called me. So I looked at the profiles and I said, well, what's going on? Well, he's forgetful. He forgets his laptop, all these different kinds of things. And I'm like, okay, but why did you hire him? Oh, he's a connector. He knows everybody. I said, so you hire him because he's a connector, you fire him because he's forgetful. How much sense does that make? And they're like, well, nobody ever put it that way. I said, why don't you put him in the field and leave him alone and see what he does in 90 days? For 90 days and see what happens. And he ended up making the best sale the company ever had.
Okay. But let me give you a scenario whereby, okay, so John is a great guy. He produces, the customers love him, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. He's really produced. But God, he's a pain in the neck in the organization. He's a pain in the neck.
Mm-hmm.
He's a member of the senior team and he's
Mm-hmm.
just disruptive and he's a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
Where do you go with that?
Yeah. Okay. So then I would speak with you and I would say, John, what is going on? Now you have to know why we're talking.
Right.
And that's difficult for companies to do. They want to pass them off to me, but don't tell them anything. They want me to be the bad guy, right?
Sprinkle the magic
Yeah,
dust on it.
exactly. So that is the biggest part of their problem. They're dishonest.
Right.
Okay, so you gotta. No one goes here. No one talks about this stuff. They're like, well, let's try to talk to John. Well, it's not working out. We'll get rid of him, get somebody else. And then the problems are never fixed. All these things, you're difficult on the team and you're creating chaos. Those are all symptoms. Okay, what would those symptoms likely be? Well, you have an excessive need to be liked, so you have to make a lot of commotion so you can gain all the attention. That's likely what's happening. It's probably a self-esteem issue on your part. And what's happening on the other people's part is it's making their lives difficult. Well, what do we want to do? Well, we got to meet halfway. It's not all you, it's not all them, it's a combination. So I look at what are you willing to do? Because if you don't do it, you're not going to work here. I don't care how successful you make the company. We're not putting up with it. So put down your rattle and your diapers and grow up. Okay? What do you want to do? Like I had this conversation with a company in Chicago. The guy, they're like, he's the best in the country at what he does. He wants leadership and don't know if I can give it to him because nobody likes him. So I got him on the phone and I said, you change this or it's over. And then he started defending himself. So I finished that talk about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, done. Owner, I got him on the phone and said, nope, he's a lost cause. They fired him.
Yeah. I think that I think that the work you do, I mean, I said, I've, firsthand kind of been on the receiving end of feedback. And I think that the way you approach it is is phenomenal. I said at the very beginning, I put you in that expert in human behavior category. That doesn't kind of say it all about you, Steve. You're direct. You're, you know, I don't think sugarcoating is something that is even comes into your vocabulary, or you probably don't even know the meaning of it. And
Right.
and and I applaud you. I applaud you for that. And I just wondering what is that drives you? Because to do what you do is, it takes some courage. I think it takes a high degree of honesty, and to do it is not simple or straightforward. What is the driver for you in doing the work?
Um, I I like to see things work, and I love people. Um, and my brain feels very good and refreshed when, let's say, I see two opponents come together and shake hands. Like
Mm,
that scenario, put that in your mind. When I can create that, then I'd do it for free. If I
okay.
could afford it, I would do it for free.
Yeah.
So everything I do, I would do for nothing. I've been working with a part owner in a company. Lots going sideways in that company. They're in huge debt. There's all kinds of problems. Um, and, you know, so he starts coming to me with his marriage issues. I dig deeper into that. Then I find out, oh, he's got basically two wives. So I'm like, you got to come clean on this. He's like, I can't. I said, well, it's not going to work. So I need you to help. I said, I just kept shutting him down. No, not doing it. Not doing it. Not doing it. You need to do this. This is what you don't do this. We do not speak. We do not speak. If you don't do this, we're not talking. So I'll wait for you. I've got things to do. Um, then it came out. So now I'm getting now texts from the wife like, this stuff happens all the time. Got a person who's the head of a company and they're all over social media. They're writing books. They're talking about company culture, this, that, and the other. Guy's got a wife at home with children and he's got a special house in Mexico and he's sleeping with a 23-year-old.
Mm.
Okay. So maybe a lot of people look at that and look at him and say, touche for you, man. Right. Yeah, but your life's really going to suck with that kind of prioritizing. Just not going to work. Now, if you want my help, straighten up.
Yeah.
If not, go have fun. See where it gets you. That's the way I deal it. That's the way I dealt with it. And he stopped using me.
He stopped using you.
He stopped using me. As a matter of fact, he didn't pay me the last payment of over $500.
Right. Okay.
So I said, listen to this podcast and I'll forgive your debt. And then I sent him a paid invoice for listening to something about something in his life that needed fixing. And I said, that's worth $500 for me if you listen to that entire episode. He says he did. He probably didn't.
Okay. I'd
You know?
say you are definitely different, Steve, and I think that the difference that you make in organizations is phenomenal. I really do. I think that what you bring to it is an energy. I think you bring to it an integrity, and you bring an honesty to it. And I think that what you also bring to an organization is probably facilitating conversations that actually really need to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
as you refer
Mm-hmm.
to that honesty, and I applaud you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Before we wrap up, and you can tell people where they can get in touch with you, a book that you have read. I know that you're an author of books yourself, but other than one
Mm-hmm.
of your own, what book would you recommend and why?
Ken Robinson, The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything is a really great read. 84% of people working are waiting for a dream job.
Mm,
And people need to give themselves permission to do what they really want to do instead of doing what they think they have to do. And I understand that that's hard to do, but this book sort of gives you permission to reassess yourself and to see what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then maybe be open to something else. And when that part of your life is opened up and feeling really good, your whole life gets better. It's a great read, a lot of stories. And Ken Robinson is an unconventional. He's unconventional in his thinking. He's a mold breaker. Um, and he's a fabulous speaker. Um, and so anything from him can be life changing if you're open to changing your life.
Steve, that's great. That's not one that I've read. I certainly go on the list. How can people get in touch with you?
Just behavioralresourcegroup.com
Okay.
or just type into Google Steven Sisler, Sisler.
Well, we'll have all of that in the show notes. But listen, can I thank you so much for being a guest today? It's been fascinating, it's been fun, and it's been very enlightening.
Thank you, John. My pleasure.